At first, everyone's initial thought was, is the new radar intended for destroyers or frigates? Honestly, my first reaction was also that it should be for destroyers. However, after carefully examining this newly exposed radar, we notice that its size is not very large. First of all, this newly revealed shipborne radar is significantly smaller in area than the four-sided phased array radar on the Type 52D destroyer. Yet, its area is slightly larger than that of the radar on Japan's Akizuki-class air defense destroyer. The Akizuki class is equipped only with C-band radar waves. Compared with S-band radar, C-band radar offers higher precision but has a relatively shorter detection range. At that time, my first thought was, could this new radar be our high-precision C-band radar? I did consider this possibility initially, but later I realized something quite interesting. Looking at the exposed radar, we can see that there is a chimney at the rear, and behind this chimney, there is clearly a radar array surface. Moreover, the angle of inclination of this rear radar array surface is similar to that of the large radar array surface on top of the ship's bridge. This indicates that it has a dual array structure. When it comes to a 3-array radar system, compared with a 4-array one, there are certain gaps in the azimuth of the radar's angle of incidence. Currently, whether it is active phased array radars or other types of radars developed by our country, we have managed to reduce their costs quite significantly. For instance, the price of the gallium nitride GaN active phased array radar seeker used in our air-to-air missiles is even lower than that of the infrared imaging seeker on the PL-10 missile. Therefore, personally, I don't think we would cut corners by omitting one array. Besides, this radar not only adopts a 3-array structure but also has a reduced size. Hence, I personally feel that it is very likely not intended for destroyers. Now, let's look at Europe. Currently, there are 2 types of frigates in Europe that also use 4-array radar systems. One is the Evo version of Italy's Frem frigate, which features a dual-band radar system, one operating in the S-band, and the other, if I recall correctly, either in the X-band or C-band. I can't remember exactly. The other is France's FDI frigate, equipped with a 4-array S-band radar. Looking at these 2 warships, the radar arrays on Italy's Frem Evo are slightly smaller, while the size of the 4-array radar on France's FDI frigate is already similar to that of the newly exposed radar. Therefore, I don't think this new radar operates in the C-band. It is probably still an S-band radar, just with a dual-array structure instead. Next, let's take a look at the U.S. Constellation-class frigate, which also adopts a 3-array radar structure. Compared with the Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, the Constellation class can reduce costs in terms of radar systems. Even when compared with Japan's Mogami-class frigates equipped with 4-array C-band radars, the array size of the Mogami class is relatively smaller than that of our newly exposed radar. However, with the advancement of modern radar back-end signal processing technology, radars operating at lower frequencies now achieve remarkably high precision. In fact, they can even function as guidance radars or even fire control radars. For example, the Hongqi 2-0 air defense missile revealed during the 93rd Military Parade uses a meter-wave radar as its guidance radar. Therefore, I personally believe that our country may not adopt C-band radars, as they are somewhat of a middle ground option with limited advantages. In my view, Japan and some European countries use C-band radars due to their relatively backward technological capabilities. In contrast, both the United States and China tend to use either X-band radars, which offer extremely high precision, or S-band radars. Of course, meter-wave radars are quite difficult to deploy on warships. Their installation would likely require a structure similar to the close hanger, like antenna arrangement seen on the Type 52D destroyers. Currently, it seems that we may have had a regressive mindset in some aspects. Having been accustomed to economic constraints in the past, we all thought that the Type 54B frigate, with its dual-array radar, would be too expensive. Later, our country even resumed the production of Type 54 Ampere's frigates, which made people wonder if the Type 54B was too costly, hence the lack of further reports on the construction of additional Type 54B hulls. Although there are online rumors suggesting that more Type 54B frigates will be built, the radar system on the Type 54B is actually a single-array structure in practical terms because the radar on the other side operates in a different frequency band. The Type 54B is equipped with an S-band radar on one side and a C-band radar on the other. similar to the top plate radar system on the Type 54 Amperes frigate. The top plate radar also has one side operating in the S-band and the other in the C-band. The only difference is that the Type 54B has replaced the radar antenna with an active phased array, while the overall working mode remains the same as that of the Type 54 Amperes. Under such circumstances, in the current naval warfare environment, the rotating search method may no longer keep up with the times. Relatively speaking, frigates, after all, cannot be compared with destroyers, so there may be some intention to cut costs by not using a 4-array radar system. This cost reduction approach is similar to that of the U.S. Constellation class, which uses a 3-array radar system. As mentioned earlier, compared with a 4-array system, a 3-array system has a shorter detection range in the area between the two adjacent radar arrays. However, considering that China's future destroyer flotillas will be fully composed of destroyers, the all-destroyer concept, frigates will basically take on secondary missions. These missions mainly include providing escort for ships like the Type 075 and Type 076 amphibious assault ships or oil tankers, as well as conducting anti-submarine operations on the outer perimeter of naval formations. Under such circumstances, since frigates are assigned to secondary tasks, it is understandable that their radar systems are somewhat less advanced than those of destroyers. Moreover, if we look carefully, the size of the radar on the newly exposed ship structure is actually very similar to the size of the radar mounted on top of the Type 54B frigate. Therefore, I personally believe that the ship structure with this newly exposed radar is intended for our country's next-generation frigates, not destroyers. When it comes to power systems, we all eagerly anticipate the day when our warships will be equipped with integrated electric propulsion (IEP) systems. If IEP is not yet feasible, a combined diesel-electric gas cod-lag propulsion system would still be a very good alternative. However, if we look carefully at the photos of the newly exposed ship structure, the chimney appears to be that of a diesel engine rather than a gas turbine. Of course, I hope I will be proven wrong later. In fact, for warships equipped with gas turbines, there is usually an air intake at the front. But since this is still a ship structure under development, it is normal that the air intake has not been revealed yet. Currently, it seems that China's future warships will follow a 3-tier classification system. The first tier includes ships like the Type 055 destroyer, which should be equipped with a 4-engine, 2-stage full gas turbine propulsion system. The second tier is represented by the current Type 52D destroyer, which uses a combined diesel and gas cod-lag propulsion system. As mentioned earlier, the future destroyer that will replace the Type 52D is expected to adopt a cod-lag propulsion system. For destroyers, there is no immediate need for such a large amount of electrical power or a full electric propulsion system. Under such circumstances, the cod-lag system can help reduce construction costs and the difficulty of warship integration, thereby creating a price gap between this new destroyer and the Type 055. Since destroyers will adopt the cod-lag propulsion system, it seems highly likely that China's next-generation frigates will still use an all-diesel power system, though there may be improvements in power output, possibly upgrading to a combined diesel-electric cod-lag propulsion system. In a cod-lag system, diesel engines drive generators, which in turn power electric motors to propel the warship. Compared with the original combined diesel propulsion system, the biggest advantage of cod-lag is that, thanks to electric propulsion, the diesel engines no longer need to be directly connected to the propellers via reduction gears. This design allows for more flexible placement of the diesel engines. With greater flexibility in positioning, the diesel engines can be better isolated for vibration reduction. As a result, even with an all-diesel power system, the noise generated by the warship during navigation on the water will be significantly reduced, even lower than that of traditional gas turbine-powered warships, which use reduction gears to drive the propellers. This is certainly an acceptable trade-off. Of course, some people argue that diesel engines have much lower power output compared with gas turbines. However, after researching relevant data, I found that the cost of diesel engines is significantly lower than that of gas turbines, which is a major advantage. Additionally, increasing a warship's maximum speed from 27 knots to 30 knots requires a nearly doubling of power output. For example, if a warship needs 40,000 shaft horsepower sheep to reach 27 knots, it would need nearly 80,000 sheep to reach 30 knots. For frigates, this increase in power would be relatively uneconomical. Although a maximum speed of 27 knots may not seem ideal to most military enthusiasts who all hope for speeds above 30 knots for the sake of impressiveness in reality, for frigates that mainly undertake secondary tasks, or perform outer perimeter anti-submarine duties in aircraft carrier battle groups. This speed is more than sufficient. The biggest advantage of sticking to 27 knots is the significant reduction in warship construction costs. Therefore, I believe that the frigate that will succeed the Type 54B will most likely still use an all-diesel power system rather than the integrated electric propulsion system, powered by both gas turbines and diesel engines generating electricity, or the cod-lag system, with diesel engines generating electricity integrated with gas turbines that many people hope for. Currently, it seems that China's next-generation frigate may be quite similar to France's FDI frigate. France's FDI frigate uses 4 diesel engines as its main power source and is equipped with a 4-array phased array radar system. In contrast, our next-generation frigate will only use a 3-array radar system, which will result in lower power supply requirements. Furthermore, since frigates mainly operate in secondary roles, there is no urgent need to equip them with weapons like laser weapons. From what we can see now, the laser weapon deployed on the Type 071 amphibious transport dock has a relatively large volume, even larger than that of a 76mm main gun. Although laser weapons have the advantage of low operational costs, if they occupy too much space on a warship, it will first of all make the ship's layout more difficult. Moreover, considering our main potential adversaries, Japan is currently developing anti-ship ballistic missiles, ASBMs, and the United States is also working on similar systems. Regardless of whether they can successfully develop these weapons, we should adopt a prepare-for-the-worst mindset and assume that they will succeed in deploying ASBMs. In reality, laser weapons would find it very difficult to intercept such ASBMs, mainly due to their limited continuous operation time. When it comes to intercepting subsonic cruise missiles, the first step is to achieve continuous and stable tracking of the target. Only then can we decide on the type of weapon to use. Additionally, currently, the cost of air defense missiles in China is decreasing. For example, at the Zhuhai Air Show, there were even air defense missiles equipped with GaN-active phased array seekers priced at only 200,000 RMB. Therefore, in the future, since Chinese frigates will mainly undertake secondary tasks, they are unlikely to encounter the main anti-ship forces of the enemy. Their primary role will be to intercept long-range cruise missiles launched by the enemy. Even if they do encounter so-called anti-ship ballistic missiles, it will still be more reliable to use air defense missiles or anti-missile missiles for interception. Now, let's discuss the main threats that China's future frigates may face. One such threat is stealthy cruise missiles like the LRASM, which also feature a certain degree of intelligence. Another example is Norway's NSM anti-ship missile. Australian warships have already been equipped with this missile, and the US Constellation-class frigates will also be armed with it in the future. The NSM and the LRASM, also known as the AGM-158C, are similar in that both adopt a passive detection method, they do not emit radar waves themselves, and they mainly fly at sea-skimming altitude. In fact, if a warship relies solely on its own sensors to detect such missiles, the detection range will be very short, making multi-wave interception quite difficult. Therefore, it is necessary to use early warning aircraft or unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs, for assistance to detect the enemy early. Then, through the Cooperative Engagement Capability (CEC) system, target data can be transmitted via data links to enable long-range interception of the enemy, thereby increasing the number of interception waves. Additionally, the United States has observed that the volume of missile launches during the Russia-Ukraine war has increased significantly. Russia has used a large number of Iranian-made Shahed suicide drones, often referred to as small motorcycles colloquially, to attack Ukraine. Previously, the United States looked down on the development of low-cost missiles, but now many American companies are engaged in developing so-called low-cost missiles. Compared with traditional missiles like the AGM-158 or the NSM, these low-cost missiles use relatively cheaper guidance methods. Moreover, they try to use commercial components as much as possible to reduce costs. Although these low-cost missiles are inferior to more specialized cruise missiles in terms of stealth capabilities, route planning capabilities, and attack trajectories on the battlefield, their biggest advantage is their low price. The current goal of the United States is to develop such missiles at a cost of $200,000 each. If the enemy launches a large number of such missiles, it will be difficult to defend against them completely. Even if just one missile penetrates the defense and hits a key target, the loss will be very painful. Furthermore, currently, although the level of UAV technology in Europe and the United States is not particularly outstanding, the cost of their UAVs is still relatively lower than that of manned aircraft. Of course, the price of UAVs like the MQ-9 is somewhat exorbitant. Even the United States has to pay tens of millions of US dollars to purchase one. It remains to be seen whether American startups specializing in UAV development will be able to reduce the cost of UAVs in the future. However, we can already see that if the US Red Wolf low-cost missile is mounted on the recently announced YFQ-42 and YFQ-44 UAVs, it would be quite suitable. The United States currently claims that the price of each of these UAVs will be several million US dollars. However, we need to keep in mind that cost overruns for projects in the United States are extremely common. Nevertheless, we should adhere to the principle of preparing for the worst and assume that they will achieve their target price. Whether it is the YFQ-42 or the YFQ-44, if they are deployed in large numbers in the future and equipped with various types of cruise missiles to attack our secondary naval formations, it will indeed be a very troublesome issue. Moreover, with a large number of missiles being launched and UAVs having the advantages of long endurance and long range, if they attack our secondary naval formations, they can launch attacks from different directions and altitudes. Under such circumstances, the rotating search radar currently used by the Type 54B frigate may no longer be suitable. Instead, a fixed 3-array radar system should be adopted, as its refresh rate and ability to handle multiple targets will be significantly superior to the radar search method of the Type 54B. Of course, for escort ships or secondary warships, their anti-submarine capability is also crucial, whether it is defending against nuclear-powered submarines, unmanned underwater vehicles UUVs, or traditional conventional submarines. The underwater speed of UUVs and conventional submarines is actually relatively moderate. Therefore, using 4 diesel engines to achieve a surface speed of 27 knots is more than sufficient to deal with them. The key issue lies in whether the sonar system can accurately locate these underwater UUVs and conventional submarines. Some people may argue that US nuclear-powered submarines have very high underwater speeds. Even the Virginia-class submarines, which we often look down on, have an underwater speed of over 33 knots. The Seawolf-class submarines have 2 claimed speed versions, both of which are extremely fast. One claim is that their underwater speed can exceed 38 knots, while another claim suggests it can reach 41 knots. Even if we take 38 knots as the standard, no surface warship currently can outrun the Seawolf-class submarines. Chasing a nuclear-powered submarine at 30 knots is essentially the same as chasing it at 27 knots. There's not much difference in effectiveness. However, the core issue is that when a nuclear-powered submarine enters its attack position, its speed is not that fast. Although the background noise in the deep sea is relatively high, even so, a normal nuclear-powered submarine will still maintain a speed of around 20 knots when attacking the enemy. It rarely exceeds 27 knots, because exceeding 27 knots will generate extremely high noise levels. If the enemy does sail at high speed, it should be noted that modern anti-submarine warfare is no longer like that of World War II, where warships relied on depth charges and anti-submarine rockets, both of which have very limited ranges, forcing ships to chase after enemy nuclear-powered submarines. Modern anti-submarine missiles, whether rocket-propelled ones or the ones with turbojet engines, which carry torpedoes and were revealed during the 93rd Military Parade, have much longer ranges and higher speeds in flight compared to the anti-submarine weapons used in World War II. If you use such modern anti-submarine weapons, even if the enemy submarine flees at high speed, exceeding 27 knots, the underwater noise it generates will be extremely loud. In particular, if the Seawolf-class submarine really sails at 41 knots, the underwater noise it produces will be even louder than the noise of the Soviet-era nuclear-powered submarines that the United States once mocked as underwater tractors. In fact, if a submarine exceeds its quiet speed underwater, you can simply use anti-submarine missiles to engage it. Currently, it is generally unrealistic for surface warships to rely on their speed to chase nuclear-powered submarines. As long as a warship's speed exceeds the underwater quiet speed of the enemy submarine, it is sufficient. Currently, it seems that China began offering the Type 52D destroyer for export on the international market either last year or the year before. There are many online rumors claiming that Saudi Arabia or Iran has purchased it, and there are various other claims. At that time, I even thought that Algeria might buy it. However, to this day, it appears that not a single Type 52D has been sold yet. This is not because the Type 52D lacks performance. Rather, it is because the Type 52D is a relatively high-tier warship. Although the overall construction cost of the Type 52D is relatively lower than that of similar destroyers from Europe and the United States, when you sell it to another country, the daily maintenance of the warship and the training of the personnel operating it will still rely on the purchasing country's own military personnel. Under such circumstances, the operational costs will naturally increase. Unless the purchasing country sends the warship back to China for major overhauls, which would reduce overhaul costs, the daily operational costs will not be lower than those of European or American warships. Currently, it seems that the Type 52D is still too high tier for the international market. Our allies do not have the same level of demand as some of the United States' key allies. Even the Aegis system is not purchased by every US ally. Only a few countries have bought it. Some countries even have a close relationship with the United States, but still refuse to buy the Aegis system because they consider it too expensive. Under such circumstances, it would be more appropriate to export warships that are one tier lower than the Type 52D. Whether it is the previous Type 54B frigate or the frigate equipped with the newly exposed radar, they are likely to have better sales prospects than the Type 52D. Looking at the newly exposed radar, we can observe several obvious features. First, it adopts a 3-array structure. Second, its shield radar array is smaller than that of the Type 52D. Under such circumstances, the back-end data processing requirements of this new radar will be relatively lower than those of the Type 52D. This will reduce the burden during system integration and back-end data processing, thereby lowering costs. Additionally, we can see that in the mainstream international market, it is quite difficult to sell a warship without a phased array radar shield these days. For example, the Type 54 Amperes frigates sold by China to Pakistan no longer use our country's top plate radar. Instead, they are equipped with the SC-2410 active phased array radar. Furthermore, the upgraded version of the Type 056 frigate recently provided by China as military aid to Cambodia is also equipped with an active phased array radar. For countries with relatively more financial resources such as Saudi Arabia or Algeria, a frigate equipped with only a rotating single-array radar may no longer be sufficient to meet their needs. At the very least, a 3-array radar system should be installed. If a purchasing country has more funds, it could even upgrade to a 4-array radar system, and this would not be a major issue for our country. Some people may ask, if our frigate uses an all-diesel power system, while the frigates or destroyers divided by frigates, depending on classification exported by Europe and the United States, are equipped with at least a cod-lag propulsion system, which offers more powerful performance, how can our frigate remain competitive in the export market? In fact, we can look back at the frigates exported by China to Thailand in the 1990 seconds. Although these two warships look very different in appearance, they actually share the same hull design. We can see that China's domestic Type 053 H2G frigate uses an all-diesel power system, while the frigate sold to Thailand was equipped with two LM2500 gas turbines. This shows that the power system configuration depends on the purchasing country's budget. If a purchasing country wants to use gas turbines, adapting the existing hull design to install gas turbines for the export version was already not a problem for China as early as the 1990 seconds. It is not the case that if our domestic version uses a diesel engine, the export version must also use a diesel engine. Ultimately, it depends on how much money the purchasing country is willing to spend. If the purchasing country has sufficient funds and wants a cod-lag propulsion system, or if it wants to save some money and opt for a CODOG system instead, China can actually provide a variety of existing solutions. In fact, this is not a major challenge in terms of design difficulty.